The rain had not stopped for 3 hours, and Marcus Bellamy was already thinking about closing the bar early when the front door slammed open with a force that made every glass on the counter shake. A woman stumbled in, soaked from head to foot, her heels missing, her dress torn at the shoulder. She was not screaming. She was not crying. She was simply standing there, breathing hard, looking behind her, as if something terrible was still chasing her through the storm. Marcus dropped the towel he was holding and moved from behind the counter. The last 2 customers had left 20 minutes earlier. It was just him, the woman, and the sound of rain hammering the windows. "Are you hurt?" he asked, keeping his distance, keeping his voice low and calm. She turned to look at him, and for a moment, her eyes seemed to focus, seemed to actually see him. Then they slid past him, toward the door, toward the dark street outside. "They can't find me here," she whispered. "Please, just for tonight." Marcus had worked in bars for 11 years. He had seen every kind of trouble walk through a door. Angry husbands, desperate gamblers, people running from debts they could never pay. But something about this woman felt different. She was clearly intoxicated, swaying slightly on her bare feet. Yet underneath the confusion, there was a sharpness in her eyes, a wariness that did not match a simple night of drinking gone wrong. He locked the front door and pulled down the blinds. "Sit down," he said. "You're safe here." She lowered herself onto a bar stool, and only then did her body seem to accept that the danger, whatever it was, had passed for the moment. Her shoulders dropped. Her hands, which had been clenched into fists, slowly opened. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, pouring a glass of water and sliding it toward her. "Elena," she said, and then, almost as an afterthought, "Elena Voss." He didn't recognize the name. There was no reason he should have, but something in the way she said it, quiet and careful, like she was testing whether it was safe to say at all, told him this was not a name she gave out easily. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping across the blinds. Elena flinched, gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. Marcus watched the car continue on and disappear around the corner, but he noticed that she did not relax until the sound of the engine had completely faded. "Someone is looking for you," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena didn't answer right away. She wrapped both hands around the water glass, staring into it as if the answer might be written on the surface. "I made a mistake tonight," she finally said. "I went somewhere I shouldn't have gone. Talked to people I shouldn't have talked to. And now I can't go home. Not yet. Not like this." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Her clothes were expensive, even torn and soaked as they were. Her watch alone was worth more than his monthly rent. Whatever world she came from, it was not his world, and every instinct told him to be careful. But she was shivering, and she was clearly not in a state to make good decisions, and the storm outside showed no sign of ending. "I live 2 streets from here," he said. "You can stay on my couch tonight. In the morning, when you're steady again, you can decide what to do next. I'm not going to ask you anything you don't want to answer." Elena looked up at him, searching his face for some sign of a hidden motive, some flicker of the kind of danger she had just escaped. She must not have found it, because after a moment she nodded, slow and small. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." He helped her stand, careful to keep a respectful distance, careful to let her lean on the counter, rather than on him, unless she truly needed it. He grabbed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, and together they slipped out the back door of the bar, avoiding the front street entirely. The walk to his apartment took only a few minutes, but it felt much longer. Every set of headlights made Elena tense. Every shadow between streetlights made her slow her steps. Marcus said nothing, only stayed close enough that she would know he was there, far enough that she would never feel trapped. Halfway down the second street, a figure stepped out from a doorway ahead of them, and Elena froze completely, her hand shooting out to grip Marcus's arm. Her fingers dug into his sleeve with surprising strength for someone who could barely walk straight a few minutes earlier. The figure turned out to be nothing more than a man walking his dog, hood up against the rain, moving quickly toward his own front door without so much as glancing in their direction. Elena did not let go of Marcus's arm until the man had disappeared inside his building, and the street was empty again. "Sorry," she whispered, releasing her grip, embarrassed by her own reaction. "I'm not usually like this." "You don't have to explain anything," Marcus said gently. "Let's just get you somewhere warm." They crossed the last street in silence, Elena's bare feet moving carefully over the wet pavement, flinching occasionally when she stepped on a stone or a piece of broken glass hidden in the dark. Marcus noticed and, without making it a big gesture, simply guided her toward the smoother path along the edge of the sidewalk, closer to the buildings, away from the gutter. A police car passed at the far end of the street, its lights off, moving at a normal, unhurried pace. It meant nothing. Officers patrolled this part of the city every night. But Elena pressed herself instinctively into the shadow of a doorway until it had gone, and Marcus found himself doing the same without entirely understanding why, simply because her fear was so convincing that it became, for a moment, his fear too. Almost there, he told her, and this time she nodded and let him lead the way without hesitation. His apartment was small and plain, a couch, a kitchen table, a bookshelf crowded with paperbacks he had read a dozen times each. It was nothing like the world Elena clearly belonged to, and he felt a flash of embarrassment as he unlocked the door and let her inside. If she noticed the modesty of the place, she didn't show it. She simply sat down on the couch, pulled his jacket tighter around herself, and let out a long, shaking breath, as if she had been holding it since the moment she walked through the bar door. "Thank you," she said quietly. Marcus brought her a blanket, a fresh glass of water, and 2 painkillers from the kitchen cabinet, setting them all on the small table beside the couch without a word. He didn't ask again what she was running from. He didn't ask who might be looking for her, or why a car passing on a quiet street could make her flinch like that. He simply made sure she was warm, made sure the door was locked, and told her he would be in the next room if she needed anything at all. "You don't even know me," Elena murmured, her eyes already growing heavy. "I know enough," Marcus said. "You needed help. That's all that matters tonight." She was asleep before he finished speaking, curled beneath the blanket, her breathing finally slow and even. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the rain streak down the window behind her, wondering what exactly he had just brought into his home. Then, from somewhere inside the folds of his jacket she was wearing, a phone began to buzz. Once, twice, 3 times. Marcus didn't move. He didn't reach for it, didn't try to see the screen. It buzzed a 4th time, then went silent. He turned off the kitchen light and walked quietly to his bedroom, leaving the door open just enough to hear if she called out. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the city, someone was still trying to reach the woman sleeping on his couch, someone who did not yet know exactly where she was, someone who Marcus was already beginning to understand he did not want knocking on his door. He lay awake a long time that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm, wondering what kind of trouble had just walked into his quiet, ordinary life. Around 2 in the morning, he heard the couch creak in the other room and rose quietly to check on her, standing in the doorway just long enough to see that she had only turned in her sleep, one arm now hanging off the edge of the cushion, her face finally calm for the first time since she had stumbled through his door. He adjusted the blanket over her shoulder without waking her and returned to his room. The phone buzzed twice more before dawn, each time from somewhere within the folds of his jacket. Marcus never looked at the screen. It was not his phone, and whatever conversation was trying to reach Elena was not his to intercept. Still, each buzz made him glance toward his bedroom door, half expecting footsteps in the hallway outside, half expecting the sound of someone testing the lock. No one came. The building stayed quiet except for the rain, which slowly softened from a hard drumming to a gentle patter against the glass, and then, sometime before sunrise, stopped altogether. Marcus finally drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, the kind where the mind never fully lets go of watchfulness. He dreamed, briefly, of headlights sweeping across a wall, of a woman's hand gripping his arm, of a name spoken so carefully it felt like a secret being tested for the first time. When he woke just after 7, gray morning light was pushing through the curtains, and for a moment he almost believed the entire night had been nothing more than that dream. Then he heard the soft sound of the couch springs shifting in the next room, and he remembered that it had all been real. Somewhere beyond his apartment walls, the city was waking up, and somewhere in that city, people who had been searching for Elena Voss through the storm were almost certainly still looking, unaware that she was, for now, only 2 streets and 1 thin apartment door away. Elena woke slowly, her head throbbing, her mouth dry, and for several long seconds she had no idea where she was. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, painted a plain off-white, with a small water stain in one corner shaped like a leaf. The blanket covering her smelled like someone else's laundry detergent, clean but foreign. She sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it, pressing a hand to her forehead as the room tilted around her. Then the memories came back in fragments. The rain, the bar, a stranger's voice, calm and steady, telling her she was safe. She looked down and saw a man's jacket still draped over her shoulders, and beside her on the small table, a glass of water and 2 painkillers sitting untouched from the night before. Footsteps approached from the hallway, and Elena's entire body tensed before she remembered where the footsteps were coming from. Marcus appeared in the doorway, already dressed, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Good morning," he said carefully, staying near the doorway rather than stepping closer, giving her space. "There's coffee if you want it. And your phone was buzzing most of the night, so I left it on the counter. I didn't look at it." Elena stared at him for a long moment, trying to read his face for any sign of deception, any hint that his kindness the night before had been a performance leading toward something else. She had learned, over years of living the life she lived, that people rarely helped without wanting something in return. But Marcus simply stood there, holding out one of the mugs, waiting. "Why didn't you look at it?" she asked, her voice still rough from sleep. "It's not mine to look at," he said simply, as if the answer were obvious. She took the coffee from him, careful not to let their fingers touch for more than a second, and wrapped both hands around the warm mug. The simple, ordinary gesture of holding something warm seemed to steady her more than anything else had since the night before. "I should go," she said, though she made no move to stand. "You can go whenever you're ready," Marcus said. "No one's stopping you. I just want to make sure you're actually steady before you walk out that door." Elena took a slow sip of the coffee, buying herself time to think. The truth was, she did not feel steady at all. Her head was pounding, her body ached in places she couldn't fully explain, and worse than any physical discomfort was the creeping dread of what waited for her outside this small, plain apartment. The calls she had not answered, the questions she would eventually have to face, the people who would want to know exactly where she had been, and exactly who she had been with. "Can I ask you something?" she said instead. "Why did you help me? You didn't know me. I could have been anyone. I could have been dangerous." Marcus considered the question seriously, the way he seemed to consider most things, without rushing toward an easy answer. "You looked like someone who needed help," he said. "That's usually enough of a reason for me." "That's a very simple way to look at the world," Elena said, and there was no mockery in her voice, only something closer to wonder, as if she had genuinely never encountered someone who thought that way before. "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but it's worked out fine so far." She almost smiled at that, the corner of her mouth twitching upward before she caught herself and looked away, back toward the window, where gray morning light filtered through thin curtains. Her phone, sitting silent now on the kitchen counter, seemed to pull at her attention even from across the room. "I need to check that," she said finally. Marcus nodded and stepped aside, giving her a clear path to the kitchen. Elena rose from the couch, still wrapped in his jacket, and crossed the small apartment on unsteady legs. She picked up the phone and immediately saw the number of missed calls displayed across the screen. 23, all from the same contact, saved simply as a single letter. Her breath caught, and for a moment her hands trembled so badly that she nearly dropped the phone. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked from the other room, careful to keep his tone light, not wanting to press her, but unable to hide the concern in his voice entirely. "Fine," Elena said quickly, too quickly, and set the phone face down on the counter, as if that alone could silence whatever was waiting inside it. "I just need a minute." She turned away from him, gripping the edge of the counter, taking slow breaths, the way someone does when they are trying very hard to appear calmer than they actually feel. Marcus watched from a respectful distance, unsure whether to approach or to give her the space she seemed to want, and in the end, he chose to simply wait, sipping his own coffee, letting the silence stretch until she was ready to break it herself. "There are things about my life that are complicated," Elena finally said, still facing away from him. "Things I can't really explain. Not because I don't trust you, because explaining them would put you in a position you don't want to be in." "You don't owe me an explanation," Marcus said. "You needed a safe place last night, and now you have one. That's the whole story. as far as I'm concerned. Elena turned to look at him then, something shifting in her expression, a kind of surprised gratitude mixed with disbelief, as if his simplicity kept catching her off guard, in a way she wasn't prepared for. Before she could respond, a heavy knock sounded at the apartment door, 3 sharp raps that seemed to fill the entire room. Elena went rigid instantly, all the color draining from her face, and she looked toward Marcus with something close to panic. "Don't answer it," she whispered. Marcus set down his mug slowly, moving toward the door with careful, quiet steps, and glanced through the small peephole. Outside stood a young man in a dark, well-tailored coat, standing with the kind of stillness that suggested training, rather than mere patience, his eyes scanning the hallway in both directions before settling back on the door. "There's someone out there," Marcus said quietly, turning back toward Elena. "He doesn't look like he's here to sell anything." Elena pressed her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide, and for a moment, Marcus thought she might actually stop breathing entirely. Then she straightened, forcing her expression into something calmer, something more composed, though her hands were still shaking at her sides. "That's Daniel," she said quietly. "He works for my family. If he found this address, it means they know I'm here." "How would he have found it?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low. "They can find anything," Elena said, and the flatness in her voice, the simple certainty of it, sent a small chill through Marcus that he could not quite explain. "It's just a matter of time before they always do." The knock came again, softer this time, almost polite, followed by a voice through the door, calm and formal. "Miss Voss, we know you're inside. No one means you any harm. We were simply asked to make sure you're safe." Marcus looked at Elena, silently asking what she wanted him to do. She hesitated only a moment before nodding, a small, resigned motion, as if she had known from the beginning that this moment was always going to come, no matter how long she managed to delay it. He unlocked the door and opened it slowly, keeping his body positioned slightly in front of the gap, an instinctive gesture of protection he hadn't fully thought through. The man outside, Daniel, looked to be around 30, with sharp, alert eyes that swept over Marcus in a single assessing glance before moving past him to find Elena standing near the kitchen counter. "Miss Voss," Daniel said, his voice carrying obvious relief beneath its professional calm. "We've been trying to reach you since midnight. Your father has had people searching half the city." "I'm fine, Daniel," Elena said, straightening her shoulders, some of her earlier composure returning, now that she had someone from her own world standing in front of her. "I had too much to drink last night, and a kind stranger made sure I got somewhere safe, instead of leaving me on the street. That's all that happened." Daniel's gaze flicked toward Marcus again, more carefully this time, taking in the modest apartment, the 2 coffee mugs, the untouched glass of water, and painkillers, still sitting on the small table beside the couch. Something in his expression shifted slightly, though Marcus could not quite tell whether it was suspicion or something closer to reluctant respect. "Your father will want a full account of the evening," Daniel said, turning his attention back to Elena. "There's a car waiting downstairs." Elena glanced back at Marcus, and for a brief moment something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything that had happened in the space of one strange, storm-soaked night. She stepped forward, and, without quite meeting his eyes, gently removed his jacket from her shoulders and held it out to him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. I mean that." Marcus took the jacket, folding it over his arm. "Take care of yourself," he said, and he meant it simply, without any hidden expectation attached to the words, though something in his chest tightened as he watched her move toward the door. Just before she stepped out into the hallway, Elena paused and turned back one final time. "Whatever they tell you about who I am," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear it, "just know that last night, you were the only person who treated me like a person, and not like something to be managed. I won't forget that." Then Daniel guided her gently down the hallway, one hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching her, and Marcus stood in his own doorway, watching them disappear toward the stairwell, the sound of their footsteps fading into the quiet of the building. He closed the door slowly and leaned back against it, letting out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The apartment felt strangely empty now, the silence pressing in, where her presence had been only moments before. He looked down at his jacket still folded over his arm and noticed, for the first time, a small folded piece of paper tucked into the inside pocket, one that had not been there the night before. He unfolded it carefully. In small, hurried handwriting, it read simply, "If they come asking questions, tell them the truth, all of it. It's the only thing that will keep you safe." Marcus read the note twice, a slow unease settling into his stomach. He had helped a stranger through a difficult night, expecting nothing in return, and yet something told him this was not the end of the story, but only the very beginning of something far larger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined a single act of kindness could become. Outside his window, a sleek black car pulled away from the curb below, disappearing into the flow of morning traffic, carrying Elena Voss back into a world Marcus knew almost nothing about, a world that, he was beginning to realize, now knew exactly where he lived. He spent the rest of the morning trying to return to his normal routine, washing the 2 coffee mugs, folding the blanket Elena had used, straightening the couch as though putting the apartment back in order might somehow undo the strangeness of the night before. But his mind kept circling back to Daniel's careful, assessing gaze, to the note folded inside his jacket pocket, to the way Elena had said they can find anything with such quiet, resigned certainty. Around noon his phone rang, an unfamiliar number displayed across the screen. He hesitated before answering, some instinct warning him that his quiet, ordinary life had already begun changing in ways he did not yet fully understand. "Marcus Bellamy?" a smooth, unfamiliar voice asked when he picked up. "Who's asking?" Marcus replied carefully. "My name is Grace Whitfield," the voice said. "I work for the Voss family. Mr. Voss would like to speak with you personally, today, if possible. He wants to thank you for what you did for his daughter." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "And if I say no?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, filled with something that might have been amusement or might have been warning. "People rarely say no to Mr. Voss," Grace said pleasantly. "But of course, the choice is entirely yours. A car will be outside your building at 6 o'clock this evening, should you decide to accept the invitation." The line went dead before Marcus could respond. He stood in the middle of his small apartment, phone still in hand, staring at the note Elena had left him, and understood, with a growing sense of unease, that the ordinary life he had built for himself, quiet and unremarkable and entirely his own, had just been pulled directly into the orbit of a family whose reach he was only beginning to comprehend. He sat down at his kitchen table and opened his laptop, typing the name Voss into a search engine before he had even fully decided to do it. The results loaded slowly, and when they did, Marcus felt his chest tighten with every new headline that appeared on the screen. Business articles referencing a company called Voss Holdings, a name attached to shipping ports, real estate developments, and financial institutions spread across 3 continents. A photograph of an older man with silver hair and sharp, unreadable eyes, identified as Julian Voss, standing beside government officials at what looked like a formal dinner. Another article, older and shorter, hinting at an ongoing investigation into the family's business practices that had quietly gone nowhere, as though it had simply been absorbed and forgotten. None of the articles mentioned violence directly, but there was something in the careful, guarded language used throughout, in the way journalists seemed to choose their words with unusual caution, that told Marcus everything he needed to know, without a single explicit statement. This was not simply a wealthy family. This was a family that people were afraid to write about honestly. He closed the laptop and sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, trying to process the sheer scale of what he had unknowingly walked into the night before. A stranger had come through his door soaked and frightened, and he had done what felt like the only decent thing to do. He had not, for a single moment, imagined that decency might lead him into the orbit of a man like Julian Voss. His phone buzzed again on the table, this time a text message from his coworker at the bar, Nathan, asking whether he was coming in for the evening shift. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen, before finally typing back a short reply asking Nathan to cover for him, explaining nothing beyond a vague personal matter that had come up unexpectedly. He spent the remaining hours before 6 o'clock pacing his small apartment, rehearsing conversations that would never happen the way he imagined them, considering and reconsidering whether accepting the invitation was wise at all. Part of him wanted to ignore the call entirely, to pretend the strange night had never happened, to return to his simple routine of bar shifts and quiet evenings, and let the Voss family fade back into the world they belonged to, far away from his own. But another part of him, quieter and more persistent, kept circling back to the note folded in his jacket pocket, to Elena's warning about telling the truth, to the unmistakable fear that had gripped her the moment that knock sounded at his door. Whatever was waiting for him inside that world, ignoring it did not feel like it would make the danger disappear. It only felt like it would leave him unprepared for whatever came next. At exactly 6 o'clock, as promised, a long black car pulled up outside his building, its engine barely audible even in the quiet evening street. Marcus watched it from his window for a long moment, jacket already in hand, and then, taking a slow breath, made his decision. The inside of the car was quiet and cool, with soft leather seats and tinted windows that made the passing city look distant and gray. The driver said nothing beyond a polite greeting, and Marcus spent the entire ride in silence, watching familiar streets give way to unfamiliar ones, watching modest apartment buildings slowly replaced by tall gates, manicured hedges, and houses set so far back from the road that they were barely visible from the street. Eventually, the car turned through a set of iron gates that opened automatically as they approached, revealing a long driveway lined with tall, trimmed trees, leading toward a mansion so large it took Marcus a moment to fully register its size. Stone steps led up to a set of heavy wooden doors, and standing at the top of those steps, waiting, was Grace Whitfield, the woman whose voice he recognized from the phone call earlier that day. "Mr. Bellamy," she said warmly as he stepped out of the car, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming. Mr. Voss is looking forward to meeting you." She led him through the entrance hall, past rooms filled with art and furniture that looked far too expensive to actually be used, toward a large study at the back of the house. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and a fire burned quietly in a stone fireplace despite the mild evening outside. Behind a wide wooden desk sat the man Marcus recognized instantly from the photographs he had found online, Julian Voss, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and utterly composed. "Mr. Bellamy," Julian said, rising from his chair and crossing the room with an outstretched hand. "Please, sit. Can I offer you something to drink?" Marcus shook the offered hand, noting the firm, deliberate grip, and took a seat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. "Water would be fine, thank you." Julian nodded to Grace, who quietly left the room, and then settled back into his own chair, studying Marcus with an expression that gave away nothing at all. "My daughter tells me you took very good care of her last night," Julian said. "That you asked for nothing in return. That you were, in her words, simply decent." "I did what anyone should have done," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady despite the weight of the older man's gaze. "She needed help. I helped her." "You would be surprised," Julian said quietly, "how rarely that turns out to be true in my experience. People who find themselves near my daughter, whether by accident or design, almost always want something: money, influence, access. It is refreshing, and frankly quite rare, to meet someone who genuinely does not." Grace returned with a glass of water, setting it carefully on the small table beside Marcus, before withdrawing again toward the door, though she did not leave the room entirely, choosing instead to stand quietly near the bookshelves, watching. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Voss," Marcus said. "I don't fully understand what world I stepped into last night. I know your family has money. I know people are careful about what they say about you. Beyond that, I don't know much, and I'm not sure I want to." Something flickered across Julian's face, an expression that might have been amusement, might have been approval. "A wise instinct," he said. "But since you already find yourself involved, however briefly, I think you deserve at least a partial explanation, rather than being left to guess at shadows." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "My family has built a great deal over 3 generations. Shipping, real estate, finance. With that kind of success comes a certain amount of attention, some of it welcome, much of it not. There are people who would very much like to see my family's influence weakened, and there are people who believe that the best way to hurt me is not through my businesses, but through my daughter." Marcus felt a chill settle over him as the pieces began to fit together. "Is that what happened last night? Someone was trying to get to her?" "It's possible," Julian said carefully. "Elena has a habit of slipping away from her security when she feels overly watched, which unfortunately makes her vulnerable during exactly those moments when protection matters most. Last night, she went somewhere she should not have gone, spoke to people she should not have trusted, and very nearly found herself in serious danger before she managed to get away and find her way to your bar. She never told me any of that, Marcus said quietly. She wouldn't have, Julian said. She protects the people who help her, sometimes more fiercely than she protects herself. It's one of the reasons I worry about her constantly, and one of the reasons I wanted to meet the man who kept her safe last night, rather than simply sending a generous thank you gift and considering the matter closed. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair, absorbing the weight of what he was being told. With respect, Mr. Voss, I'm not sure why any of this requires a personal meeting. I helped a stranger. That's the whole story, as far as I'm concerned. Because, Julian said, his voice growing quieter, more deliberate, there are people around my daughter, people within my own organization, who do not yet believe that story is quite so simple. There are those who suspect you may have been placed in that bar deliberately, that your kindness was calculated rather than genuine, meant to gain her trust for some future purpose. Marcus felt his stomach drop. That's not true, he said firmly. I've worked at that bar for 3 years. Anyone can confirm that. I had no idea who she was until she told me her name, and even then it meant nothing to me. I believe you, Julian said, and something in his tone suggested he meant it. But belief and proof are different things, and in my world, proof matters far more than trust. Until my people are satisfied that you are exactly who you appear to be, I'm afraid you may find yourself under a certain amount of scrutiny. I wanted to tell you this myself, rather than have you discover it in less pleasant ways. Before Marcus could respond, the study door opened, and Elena stepped inside, dressed now in clean, simple clothes, her hair still slightly damp from a shower, looking far more composed than she had that morning. She stopped short at the sight of Marcus sitting across from her father, surprise, and something like worry crossing her face. Father, she said carefully, what is this? I invited Mr. Bellamy here to thank him properly, Julian said smoothly, and to explain a few things he deserved to understand, given the position he now unfortunately finds himself in. Elena's eyes moved between her father and Marcus, clearly trying to gauge how much had already been said. What position? She asked. Some of my people believe his involvement last night may not have been as accidental as it appears, Julian said simply. That's ridiculous, Elena said immediately, her voice sharp with an anger that surprised even Marcus. He didn't know who I was. He barely let me tell him my last name before he was making sure I had water and painkillers, instead of asking me a single question about who might be looking for me. If anyone suggests otherwise, they clearly weren't in that room. Julian raised a hand, a small gesture that seemed to instantly calm the room, though Elena's jaw remained tight. I know, Elena. I'm simply telling him what he may encounter, so he isn't caught unprepared. Elena crossed the room and sat in the chair beside Marcus, close enough that their earlier conversation from that morning seemed to hang unspoken in the air between them. You didn't have to come here, she said quietly to him. Your father made it clear it wasn't really optional, Marcus said, and though his tone was light, the truth beneath it was not lost on either of them. Julian watched the exchange between them carefully, his sharp eyes missing nothing, and after a long moment he spoke again. Mr. Bellamy, I would like to offer you something in return for your help last night. Not payment, since you clearly want nothing of the sort, but protection. For the time being, until my people are fully satisfied of your innocence, I would like a small security detail stationed near your apartment and your place of work. That's not necessary, Marcus said quickly. I'm afraid it is, Julian said, his tone firm but not unkind. If there are people who suspect you were deliberately placed near my daughter, there is a real possibility that others, perhaps those with less patience than my own staff, might see you as either a threat to be removed or a tool to be used against my family. Either possibility puts you in genuine danger, whether you asked for it or not. The weight of those words settled heavily over the room. Marcus glanced at Elena, searching her face for reassurance, but found instead a kind of grim acknowledgement that told him her father was not exaggerating the risk. He's right, Elena said quietly. I hate that he's right, but he is. The moment Daniel found you this morning, others may have noticed too. It's better to have protection you don't think you need than to need protection you don't have. Marcus sat back in his chair, feeling the full scope of what had begun, as a simple act of kindness, settling over him, like a weight he had not asked to carry. 24 hours earlier, His greatest concern had been closing the bar on time during a rainstorm. Now he was sitting in the study of one of the wealthiest and most guarded families in the city, being told that his life might genuinely be in danger simply because he had refused to leave a stranger alone on a dangerous night. "I don't know how to live like this," Marcus admitted quietly. "Security details, people watching my apartment, suspicion following me around. That's not the life I built for myself." "No one is asking you to live like this forever," Julian said. "Only until the truth of last night is fully established, and the people who doubt you are satisfied. My daughter believes in your honesty. I am inclined, cautiously, to believe her judgment, but belief takes time to become certainty, and until then, caution is simply wisdom." Elena reached over and, after a brief hesitation, placed her hand lightly over Marcus's, on the arm of the chair, a small gesture of reassurance that surprised them both. "I got you into this," she said quietly. "Let me help get you through it." Marcus looked down at her hand, then up at her face, and found there none of the guarded distance from earlier that morning, only a quiet, genuine determination. Whatever world she came from, whatever danger surrounded her family, he found himself believing, in that moment, that her gratitude was as real as her fear had been the night before. "All right," he said finally, turning back toward Julian. "I'll accept the protection. But I want to understand exactly what I'm walking into. If people think I'm a threat to your family, I want to know who they are and why they think that, so I'm not blindsided." Julian studied him for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his sharp eyes. "That," he said, "is a reasonable request. Grace will arrange a full briefing for you tomorrow. For tonight, my driver will take you home, and 2 of my men will remain stationed near your building until further notice." As Marcus rose to leave, Julian stood as well, extending his hand once more. "Thank you again, Mr. Bellamy, for what you did for my daughter. Whatever comes next, know that it was not something you brought upon yourself through any fault of your own. Sometimes decency simply finds itself in the path of danger, entirely by accident." Marcus shook his hand, unsure whether the words were meant to comfort him or to warn him, and as he followed Grace back through the mansion toward the waiting car, he glanced back once to see Elena still standing in the doorway of the study, watching him go, an unreadable mixture of gratitude and worry written across her face. The ride home felt very different from the ride there. The city passing outside the tinted windows no longer looked distant and unfamiliar, but suddenly closer, sharper, full of shadows that might or might not be watching him. For the first time since the storm the night before, Marcus understood, fully and completely, that his ordinary life had ended the moment Elena Voss walked through his bar's front door, and whatever came next, there was no simple way back to the quiet routine he had left behind. When the car pulled up outside his building, Marcus noticed 2 other vehicles parked along the street that had not been there before, unremarkable sedans positioned at either end of the block, their drivers barely visible through the darkened glass. He understood, without needing to be told, that these were the men Julian had promised, already in place, already watching over a life that had, until yesterday, needed no watching at all. Inside his apartment, everything looked exactly as he had left it that afternoon, and yet nothing felt quite the same. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time without turning on any lights, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, trying to process the sheer speed at which his world had shifted. A part of him wanted to call Nathan, to explain everything, to have someone ordinary to talk to, who might make the last 24 hours feel less impossible. But he found he did not know where to begin, and some instinct told him that the fewer people who knew the details of what he had stumbled into, the safer everyone around him would remain. The following morning, exactly as Julian had promised, Grace arrived at his apartment, carrying a slim folder and 2 cups of coffee from a shop down the street. She sat across from him at his kitchen table, looking entirely out of place among his simple furniture in her sharply tailored blazer, and opened the folder without any unnecessary small talk. "There are 3 names you should know," she said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "People within the organization, or connected closely to it, who have expressed doubts about the circumstances of Tuesday night." Marcus looked down at the paper. 3 names were printed there, along with brief descriptions. Victor Cade, head of a rival shipping consortium that had clashed with Voss Holdings for years. Sophie Marlowe, a former assistant to Julian who had left the family's employment under circumstances Grace described only as complicated. and a name simply listed as unknown, attached to a note that read only, someone within Elena's own circle of acquaintances, feeding information outward. Someone close to her is talking to outsiders? Marcus asked, looking up. We believe so, Grace said. It's the most troubling possibility, and the hardest to confirm. Elena trusts very few people completely, but even a small circle can contain someone willing to sell information, whether out of greed or resentment, or something else entirely. And they think I might be connected to one of these people? Marcus asked. It's a possibility being considered, nothing more, Grace said carefully. Your background has already been reviewed. Nothing troubling has surfaced. But reviews like that take time to feel conclusive, and until they do, caution remains the safest course for everyone involved, including you. Marcus studied the three names again, memorizing them without entirely meaning to, aware that whatever role he now played in this unfolding situation, ignorance would serve him far worse than understanding. What am I supposed to do with this information? He asked. Nothing, for now, Grace said, closing the folder. Simply be aware. If any of these names, or anyone connected to them, approaches you directly, contact me immediately, day or night. And Mr. Bellamy, one more thing. She paused, meeting his eyes with unusual directness. Elena rarely trusts strangers, and she trusts almost no one completely. The fact that she trusts you, even partially, after only one night, has not gone unnoticed by the rest of the household. Some will see that as reassuring. Others may see it as exactly the kind of vulnerability someone might try to exploit. She rose from the table, gathering the folder, and left him with those words hanging heavily in the quiet apartment. Marcus sat alone for a long while afterward, staring at the door she had closed behind her, understanding with growing clarity that his simple act of kindness had placed him not only near danger, but squarely inside a web of suspicion, loyalty, and hidden motives that stretched far beyond anything he could have imagined 2 nights earlier. 3 days passed in a strange, uneasy calm. Marcus returned to his shifts at the bar, though the presence of unfamiliar cars parked nearby, always a discreet distance away, was a constant reminder that his life was no longer entirely his own. Nathan noticed the change in him almost immediately, the way Marcus flinched slightly whenever the front door opened too quickly, the way his eyes drifted toward the windows more often than usual. You've been weird since Tuesday, Nathan said one evening as they closed up together, stacking chairs onto tables. You want to talk about it? Not really, Marcus said, offering a tired smile. Just some complicated stuff. It'll sort itself out. Nathan didn't push further, though the concern on his face lingered a moment longer before he let the subject drop. Marcus appreciated the restraint more than he could say. The fewer people who understood the details of what he had walked into, the fewer people who could be dragged into danger alongside him. Elena called him twice during those 3 days, brief conversations that felt strangely normal despite everything surrounding them, questions about how he was adjusting, reassurances that her father's people were watching carefully, small moments of genuine warmth that made the growing tension in his life feel, for a few minutes at a time, almost bearable. On the 4th evening, everything changed. Marcus was walking home from a late shift, the streets quieter than usual, when a car pulled up slowly beside him, matching his pace along the sidewalk. He recognized it instantly as one of the vehicles that had been stationed near his building, and his first instinct was relief, assuming it was simply his usual escort checking in. The window rolled down, but the face that appeared was not one he recognized. A woman, sharp-featured and composed, studied him with cool, assessing eyes. Marcus Bellamy, she said, her voice carrying an edge of quiet authority. My name is Sophie Marlowe. I believe Grace already mentioned me. Marcus stopped walking, his heart rate spiking as he recognized the name from the list Grace had shown him days earlier. What do you want? He asked, keeping his voice as steady as he could manage. Just a conversation, Sophie said. Get in. I promise you'll be back on this sidewalk within 20 minutes. I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus said, taking a step back. Sophie's expression didn't change, though something in her posture shifted, a kind of patient, practiced calm that Marcus found more unsettling than any overt threat could have been. I understand your hesitation, she said, but consider this. If I truly meant you harm, I wouldn't have rolled down my window and given you my name. I'd have simply taken what I wanted from the shadows, the way people who actually intend harm usually do. I want to talk. That's all. Marcus glanced up and down the empty street, weighing his options, aware that whatever protection Julian's men were meant to provide seemed conspicuously absent in this particular moment. Reluctantly, he opened the car door and slid into the back seat, leaving it unlocked, positioning himself near the handle in case he needed to leave quickly. "You worked for Julian Voss," Marcus said as the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, though not, he noticed with some relief, in the direction of anywhere unfamiliar or isolated. "For nearly 6 years," Sophie said, "I managed a great deal of the family's private affairs, Elena's schedule, her security arrangements, her father's more delicate business negotiations. Then, one day, I was simply informed my services were no longer needed. No real explanation given, despite years of loyal service. What does that have to do with me?" Marcus asked. "Perhaps nothing," Sophie said, glancing at him briefly, before returning her attention to the road ahead. "Or perhaps everything. I've heard the story circulating through the household. A stranger who happened to be exactly where Elena needed him, exactly when she needed him, showing exactly the right amount of restraint and decency to earn her trust within a single evening. Forgive me if years of working closely with that family have made me somewhat skeptical of convenient timing." "It wasn't convenient," Marcus said, frustration creeping into his voice despite his effort to remain calm. "It was a coincidence. She walked into my bar in the middle of a storm. I didn't arrange any of it." "Perhaps," Sophie said again, her tone giving nothing away. "But I'd be careful, Mr. Bellamy, about assuming coincidence is always what it appears to be. Julian Voss did not build what he built by leaving things to chance, and he did not survive as long as he has in his particular world by trusting easily. If you are exactly who you claim to be, an ordinary bar manager who simply helped a frightened stranger, then you have nothing to worry about from me. But if you are something else, something more calculated, I would advise you to walk away from this family entirely, before you find yourself far deeper in their world than you ever intended." "Is that a warning?" Marcus asked. "It's advice," Sophie said. "Whether you choose to see it as a warning is entirely up to you." The car slowed and came to a stop, precisely where it had picked him up, the entire conversation lasting almost exactly the 20 minutes Sophie had promised. Marcus opened the door and stepped back onto the sidewalk, watching as the car pulled away and disappeared around the corner, leaving him standing alone in the quiet evening, with far more questions than he had possessed only minutes earlier. He called Grace the moment he reached his apartment, relaying the entire conversation in careful detail. Her response when it came was clipped and immediate. "Stay inside," she said. "I'm sending someone to you within the hour." "She didn't threaten me," Marcus said. "Not directly. She just seemed like she wanted to warn me about something." "Sophie Marlowe doesn't do anything without a purpose," Grace said. "If she approached you directly, it means she's either trying to gauge whether you're a genuine threat to the family, or she's trying to plant doubt in your mind for reasons of her own. Either way, it means people are moving faster than we anticipated." Within the hour, as promised, a stern-faced man named Henry arrived at Marcus's apartment, introducing himself briefly as part of Julian's security team, before positioning himself just inside the front door, silent and watchful. Marcus tried to focus on ordinary tasks, making dinner, tidying the kitchen, but his mind kept circling back to Sophie's words, to the quiet certainty in her voice, when she suggested that his kindness might have been calculated rather than genuine. Elena arrived just before 9, slipping into the apartment with Henry's quiet permission, her expression tight with worry the moment she saw Marcus. "Grace told me what happened," she said, crossing the room quickly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Marcus said. "Shaken, maybe, but fine. She didn't hurt me. She just talked." "Sophie doesn't need to hurt anyone to do damage," Elena said, sitting down across from him, her hands twisting together in her lap. "She's brilliant and she's angry, and she knows exactly how to make people doubt things they shouldn't doubt." "Do you think she's dangerous?" Marcus asked. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I think she's hurt, and hurt people sometimes do reckless things to feel powerful again. Whether that makes her dangerous to you specifically, I honestly don't know. But I don't like that she approached you directly. It means she's watching closely, and it means she's not afraid to insert herself into whatever is happening between us." "Between us?" Marcus repeated quietly. Elena's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked away, seeming to realize the implication of her own words only after she had spoken them. I mean, she said, whatever is happening because of what you did for me, that's what I meant. Marcus let the moment pass without pressing further, though something in his chest tightened at the words regardless. What happens now? He asked instead. Now, Elena said, straightening, some of her earlier composure returning. My father increases your protection, and we find out exactly what Sophie is really after. She wouldn't approach you without a reason. People like her don't move without a plan. Over the following 2 days, Grace's team worked quietly to trace Sophie's recent movements, uncovering a pattern of meetings with associates of Victor Cade, the rival businessman Grace had mentioned during her earlier briefing. The picture that slowly emerged was unsettling. Sophie, resentful over her dismissal, appeared to be feeding information to Victor's organization in exchange for financial support, information that included details about Elena's routines, her security arrangements, and now, apparently, her connection to Marcus. If Victor knows about you, Julian said grimly during an urgent meeting at the mansion, Marcus seated once again in the leather chair across from his desk, then you are no longer simply a person of interest to my own security team. You may be viewed by outsiders as a way to reach my daughter indirectly, through someone she trusts and cares for. What does that mean for me? Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. It means the protection around you needs to increase substantially, Julian said. And it means we need to move quickly to neutralize whatever plan Victor and Sophie may be forming, before either of them decides that involving you directly serves their purposes. Elena, seated beside Marcus, reached over and took his hand without hesitation this time, her grip firm and steady, despite the fear evident in her eyes. We're not going to let anything happen to you, she said quietly. I promise you that. Marcus looked at her, at the fierce determination in her expression, and felt, despite the mounting danger surrounding him, a strange and unexpected steadiness settle over his own fear. Whatever world he had been pulled into, whatever danger now shadowed his ordinary life, he was no longer facing it entirely alone, and somehow, that made all the difference. The following afternoon, Marcus insisted on returning to the bar for his scheduled shift, unwilling to let fear completely dismantle the last remaining piece of his ordinary life. Henry accompanied him, staying close but unobtrusive, positioned near the entrance while Marcus worked behind the counter, forcing himself to focus on the familiar rhythm of pouring drinks and wiping down surfaces, grateful for anything that resembled normal life. Halfway through the evening shift, a man Marcus did not recognize took a seat near the far end of the counter, ordering a drink he barely touched, his eyes drifting toward Marcus far too often to be simple curiosity. Henry noticed immediately, shifting his position slightly to keep both Marcus and the stranger within clear view, his hand resting casually near his jacket in a way that Marcus understood, without needing to be told, was anything but casual. You seem tense, the stranger said eventually, addressing Marcus directly, his tone friendly on the surface, but carrying an undercurrent that made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck rise. Rough week? Something like that, Marcus said carefully, keeping his movements steady, refusing to let his unease show. I hear you've made some interesting new friends recently, the man continued, swirling the drink in front of him without lifting it to his lips. Powerful friends. Must be quite an adjustment for someone like you. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said evenly. The man smiled, a thin, humorless expression that did not reach his eyes. Of course you don't, he said. Just consider this a friendly piece of advice. Powerful friends can offer a great deal of protection, but they can just as easily become a liability the moment they decide someone is more trouble than they're worth. Loyalty in that world runs one direction, Mr. Bellamy. Downward, from them to you, but rarely back the other way. Before Marcus could respond, Henry stepped forward, positioning himself directly beside the stranger's seat, his presence alone enough to shift the entire tone of the conversation. I think it's time you settled your tab, Henry said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument. The stranger studied Henry for a long moment, seeming to weigh the situation carefully, before finally rising from his seat, tossing enough cash onto the counter to cover the untouched drink, and walking calmly toward the exit without another word. At the door, he paused just long enough to glance back at Marcus one final time, an unreadable expression flickering across his face, before disappearing into the night. Who was that? Marcus asked, his heart still pounding despite his best effort to appear composed. I don't know, Henry admitted, already speaking quietly into a small radio clip near his collar, relaying a description to someone on the other end of the line. But I intend to find out very quickly. Until then, we're closing early tonight, and you're not walking home alone. Marcus nodded, locking the front door earlier than usual for the second time in less than a week. The eerie parallel to that first storm-soaked night not lost on him as he gathered his things and followed Henry out through the back entrance into the waiting car. 2 nights later, the situation escalated further. Henry, stationed once again outside Marcus's apartment, radioed in reporting an unfamiliar vehicle circling the block twice within a short span of time. Its occupants unknown, its intentions unclear. Marcus was moved quickly and quietly to a secure location within the Voss estate, a guest wing far from the main house, where Elena found him later that evening, sitting alone by a window, watching the dark grounds outside. "You didn't have to come check on me," Marcus said as she entered. "Yes, I did," Elena said simply, sitting beside him. "None of this would be happening if you hadn't helped me that night. I don't take that lightly." "I'd do it again," Marcus said quietly, even knowing everything that's happened since. Elena turned to look at him, something soft and searching in her expression. "Why?" she asked. "You've been threatened, followed, dragged into a world that clearly isn't yours. Most people would regret ever stopping to help me." "Most people," Marcus said, "didn't see how scared you were that night. I couldn't have walked away from that, no matter what came after." The room fell quiet between them, filled with something neither of them quite named aloud. And outside, in the darkness beyond the estate's high walls, the danger that had followed Marcus into this new and unfamiliar world continued to circle closer, patient and unseen, waiting for its moment. By morning, Grace had identified the man from the bar. His name was Lucas Fenwick, a longtime associate of Victor Cade, known within certain circles for handling delicate, unofficial negotiations on Victor's behalf. His appearance at Marcus's workplace was no coincidence, and it confirmed what Julian's team had feared since Sophie's initial approach days earlier. Victor Cade was no longer simply gathering information from a distance. He was actively testing how close he could get, and how much pressure Marcus might withstand before something useful or something exploitable emerged. Julian called an urgent meeting that morning, gathering Grace, Henry, Elena, and Marcus in the study where Marcus had first learned the truth of the family's world days earlier. The mood in the room was tense, charged with an urgency that had not been present during their first conversation. "Victor has grown bolder than I anticipated," Julian said, standing near the fireplace rather than seated behind his desk, his composure noticeably strained for the first time since Marcus had met him. "Approaching Mr. Bellamy directly, in a public place, is a significant escalation. It tells me he believes he has something to gain, and men like Victor rarely take risks without calculating the potential reward carefully." "What does he want?" Marcus asked. "Leverage," Julian said simply. "Against me, against my business, and now it seems, against my daughter through you. If he can convince you that your safety depends on distancing yourself from this family, or worse, if he can manipulate you into becoming an unwitting source of information, he gains an advantage he has wanted for years." "I would never do that," Marcus said firmly. "I don't doubt your intentions," Julian said. "But intentions matter less than outcomes in Victor's world. Fear alone can make people behave in ways they never intended, simply to protect themselves or the people they care about." Elena, who had remained quiet since the meeting began, finally spoke, her voice steady, despite the tension in the room. "Then we stop reacting to Victor and Sophie, and we act first," she said. "We've spent days playing defense, moving Marcus from place to place, increasing security, waiting to see what they do next. It's time we controlled the situation, instead of letting them dictate it." "What did you have in mind?" Julian asked, studying his daughter with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "A public statement," Elena said, "not vague, not filtered through lawyers or careful phrasing. The truth, plainly told, about what actually happened that night, directly from me. If Victor's entire plan depends on convincing people that Marcus's involvement was calculated, then removing that doubt publicly removes his leverage entirely. There's no story to sell if everyone already knows the real one." Julian considered this for a long moment, his sharp eyes moving between his daughter and Marcus. "It's a bold approach," he said finally. It also exposes you both to a different kind of scrutiny, the kind that comes from public attention rather than private suspicion. I'd rather face that, Elena said, than continue watching people I care about get pulled into danger because of secrecy that was never protecting anyone in the first place. Marcus looked at her, surprised by the conviction in her voice, by the willingness to step into public exposure for his sake, rather than allowing the quiet, dangerous uncertainty to continue unresolved. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "I am," Elena said, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "You didn't ask for any of this. The least I can do is make sure the truth protects you, instead of leaving you exposed to whatever story Victor decides to tell instead." Julian, after a long moment of consideration, nodded slowly. "Grace, arrange it," he said, "carefully, and soon. If we're going to remove Victor's leverage, we should do it before he has the chance to act further." 2 days later, Elena gave a brief, carefully arranged statement to a small group of trusted journalists, describing plainly, and without exaggeration, the events of that stormy night. Her own moment of vulnerability, the stranger who asked for nothing and expected nothing, the simple decency that had kept her safe when she needed it most. She made no mention of Victor by name, no direct accusation, only a clear, undeniable account that left no room for the doubts Sophie and Victor had been quietly cultivating. The story spread quickly, framed not as scandal, but as something rarer and more compelling, a simple, genuine act of kindness in a world where such things seemed increasingly hard to find. Marcus found himself, uncomfortably, at the edges of public attention for the first time in his life, though Julian's team worked quickly to shield him from the more intrusive aspects of that attention, keeping his home address private, redirecting media inquiries away from his workplace. The effect on Victor's plans was immediate and unmistakable. With the true story now public and impossible to twist into suspicion, whatever leverage he had hoped to build around Marcus evaporated entirely. Grace's team confirmed within days that Sophie Marlowe had abruptly ended her communications with Victor's associates, apparently unwilling to continue a plan that no longer offered any realistic advantage, and Lucas Fenwick was not seen near Marcus's apartment or workplace again. Julian summoned Marcus back to the mansion nearly 2 weeks after that first storm-soaked night, though this time the meeting carried none of the tension of their earlier conversations. Elena sat beside her father in the study, her posture relaxed in a way Marcus had not seen since the morning after they first met. "It appears the immediate danger has passed," Julian said, a rare, genuine warmth in his expression. "Victor has withdrawn, at least for now. Sophie has gone quiet, and you, Mr. Bellamy, have proven yourself far more resilient than most people would have been, given the circumstances you were thrown into without warning or preparation." "I'm just glad it's over," Marcus admitted. "It's rarely entirely over in my world," Julian said honestly, "but the immediate threat has passed, and for that, I owe you a debt I'm not sure I can adequately repay. You protected my daughter when you had no reason to, and you endured danger on her behalf without ever asking for anything in return. That kind of character is rare, and I do not take it lightly." "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said. "I meant what I said the very first night. I helped her because she needed help. That's all it ever was." Julian studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, something like genuine respect settling into his expression. "Then let me simply say this," he said. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it, my family's door remains open to you. That is not an offer I extend lightly, or often." As Julian excused himself from the room, leaving Marcus and Elena alone for the first time since the danger had begun to fade, Elena rose and crossed to stand beside him near the window, looking out over the same grounds where, weeks earlier, danger had felt like it might be waiting behind every shadow. "You could have walked away at any point," Elena said quietly. "Once you realized how complicated my world was, once the danger became real, you had every reason to disappear back into your own life, and let all of this fade into a strange story you barely believed happened." "I thought about it," Marcus admitted honestly. "More than once, if I'm being truthful. But every time I considered it, I kept thinking about that first night, about how scared you were, about how much worse things might have gone if someone else had found you instead of me. I couldn't just walk away from that, even when things got difficult." Elena turned to face him fully, something soft and unguarded in her expression that he had not seen from her before. not even in their quietest moments together. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who want something from my family," she said. "Money, influence, protection, access. It's exhausting, always wondering what someone truly wants beneath their kindness. But you never wanted anything. Not that first night, and not through any of the danger that came after. I don't think I've ever trusted anyone the way I've come to trust you, and I don't entirely know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it," Marcus said gently. "It's not a debt you owe, it's just true." A small, genuine smile broke across Elena's face, the first Marcus had seen from her since that very first frightened night in his bar. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think whatever this is between us is worth exploring, once the rest of the world stops treating it like a security concern." Marcus laughed, a light, easy sound that felt like the first true release of tension in weeks. "I'd like that," he said simply. Outside the window, the estate grounds stretched wide and peaceful under the afternoon sun, an entirely different world from the storm and fear that had brought them together weeks earlier. Marcus understood, standing there beside her, that his ordinary life had changed permanently the moment Elena walked through his bar's front door, soaked and frightened and utterly unaware of how far her gratitude would eventually carry them both. He had never expected kindness to lead him into danger, into wealth, into a world of hidden threats and quiet power he had never imagined existed so close to his own simple life. But standing there, with Elena beside him, the fear finally behind them, he found that he could not bring himself to regret a single moment of it. In the weeks that followed, Marcus slowly learned more about what had happened behind the scenes to bring the danger to a close. Grace explained, during one of her now regular visits to check in on him, that Victor Cade had quietly withdrawn from any further contact with Sophie Marlowe, once the public statement removed his ability to twist the story to his advantage. Without leverage, without a hidden narrative left to exploit, pursuing the matter further offered him nothing but risk, and men like Victor, Grace explained, rarely continued down a path once the potential reward disappeared. Sophie herself reached out once, unexpectedly, through a brief letter delivered to the mansion, rather than any direct confrontation. Julian shared its contents with Marcus and Elena during a quiet evening at the estate, reading aloud Sophie's carefully worded acknowledgement that she had allowed old resentment to cloud her judgment, that she had never intended for an innocent man to be drawn into danger simply for showing kindness to a frightened stranger. It was not quite an apology, not fully, but it was, as Julian noted quietly, as close to one as Sophie Marlowe was likely to offer anyone. "Will you respond to her?" Marcus asked. "Eventually," Julian said, "not out of forgiveness necessarily, but because closing old wounds carefully tends to prevent new ones from opening later. It's a lesson I learned slowly, over many years in this world." Henry remained assigned near Marcus for a few more weeks, though the tension that had once accompanied his presence gradually faded into something closer to easy familiarity. By the final week of his assignment, Marcus found himself genuinely sad to see him reassigned elsewhere, the quiet, watchful man having become, in his own understated way, something like a friend during the strangest month of Marcus's life. Nathan, at the bar, finally got the explanation Marcus had withheld weeks earlier, delivered over drinks after closing one slow Tuesday evening. He listened with wide eyes as Marcus recounted the storm, the mansion, the danger, and the unlikely bond that had formed through all of it, shaking his head in open disbelief by the time the story reached its end. "You're telling me," Nathan said slowly, "that helping one drunk woman get home safely turned into all of that?" "Pretty much," Marcus said, smiling into his glass. "And now you're what, dating her?" Nathan asked. "The daughter of one of the richest men in the city?" "We're figuring that part out," Marcus admitted. "Slowly, carefully, but yes, something like that." Nathan laughed, shaking his head again, though there was genuine warmth behind his disbelief. "Only you, Marcus," he said. "Only you could turn a bar full of regulars and a slow Tuesday night into something out of a movie." Marcus found, in the weeks that followed, that his life had settled into a new and unexpected rhythm, one that balanced the simple routines of his old life with the occasional, careful visits into Elena's far more guarded world. He continued working his usual shifts at the bar, continued his quiet evenings with paperback novels and simple meals, but now those ordinary moments were interwoven with dinners at the estate, quiet walks through the grounds with Elena, and a growing, easy comfort between two people who had begun their connection under the worst possible circumstances and had somehow built something genuine from it regardless. Elena, for her part, seemed lighter than she had been during those first tense weeks, more willing to laugh freely, more willing to step outside the careful, guarded persona she had worn like armor for most of her adult life. She still carried a wariness that Marcus suspected would never fully disappear, a natural consequence of growing up inside a world where trust had to be earned carefully and rarely came without conditions. But around him, that wariness softened just enough to let something real take root. Some nights later, back in his own small apartment, Marcus sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the street below, no longer searching for unfamiliar cars or watchful strangers, simply enjoying the quiet return of an ordinary evening. His phone buzzed once on the table beside him, a message from Elena, simple and warm, asking whether he was free for dinner that weekend. He smiled, typed back a quick reply, and set the phone aside, looking out once more at the calm, unremarkable street below, understanding fully now that sometimes the smallest acts of decency carry consequences far beyond anything a person could ever predict, and that occasionally, if a person is fortunate enough, those consequences turn out to be worth every moment of uncertainty they bring along the way.